Hi there. Welcome to Full Frontal Philosophy, Episode 2. Today I want to talk about Platonism and Platonic idealism. But before I get there, I want to say something about deviance. Because deviance is really what Platonism is about. It's what Platonism fixes. So using Platonic ideals allows you to experience deviance in the world and not have to think about it. So what do I mean by deviance? Let's say I make a drawing of form like that. And the question is that a circle? And like it kind of is and it kind of isn't. Like it's sort of roundish, but it's definitely not perfect. And the question is, what is it that makes something a thing, like a circle, as opposed to not that thing? Or maybe it's a deviant circle. So one way to think about it is it close to a circle? It's kind of close. Like you could think about it as a circle. If I seal it up there, then sort of topologically, it's a circle because you could sort of squish it and mush it to make it into a circle. But there's something kind of unsatisfying about that idea. And I think there's a better way of looking at it, which is to think about it in terms of what would it be if you kind of averaged it out, or if you messed with it kind of randomly. And what we see is like that if you maximize the entropy of the form, like if you jiggled it in every direction, you'd get a circle. Or if you spun it, like that's another way, if you made it spin really fast, it would look like a circle if you spun it fast enough. But if you like jiggle it, you kind of get the same effect. And if we just kept sort of jiggling and jiggling pretty randomly, it gets more and more like a circle, and eventually you really have no idea what else it could be other than a circle. So the idea is here that if you make it kind of mess with it randomly, eventually you'll get a circle. And that's sort of the relationship between that deviant circle and circularity in a physical sense. And that's really what makes entropy so useful. And we'll get to that. We won't try to figure out what it means right now, but just to kind of have that in the back of the concept of an idea, sort of like a maximum entropy idea versus the reality. Like what we have here is lots of deviance, and then if you put all the deviance back together, you get sort of a very perfect circle eventually. But so getting back to Platonism, like the idea for Platonism is really to have an abstract set of ideas that have names, sort of named categories, things you can talk about without having to explain what they are. And then in reality, you have like instances of those ideals. And what's interesting is this is kind of the default model of how we talk about categories and how we use categories. So it allows us to exchange ideas without having to define the foundations for the words we use or convey the ideas, because the meaning of the words all exist in this universal abstract place. So things have sort of a meaning that's independent and isolated and perfect. So one way to define Platonism is that it's the view that there exist abstract, that is, non-spatial and non-temporal objects. Because abstract objects are wholly non-spatio-temporal, it follows that they are also entirely non-physical. They do not exist in the physical world and are not made of physical stuff. And they're not mental, so they're not in our minds or ideas in minds, and they are not disembodied souls or gods or anything else along those lines. In addition, they are unchanging and entirely causally inert. That is, they cannot be involved in cause and effect relationships with other objects. So that's just Ballinger wrote that in 2022, so it's recent enough. So Platonism as an idea and philosophically is pretty unfashionable, obviously, because it's so abstract and it's so dependent on the abstract. The last great proponents of Platonism would have been Bertrand Russell and Gottfried Frege back in the early 20th century. People still use it, but it's nobody would say I'm a Platonist. So Plato's notion that information about reality occupies an abstract realm of perfect categories is still very intuitive, even if it's kind of out of fashion. One place where Platonism kind of stayed and continues to be used is in mathematics. And this is interesting because it goes to some of the sort of early work and the most interesting people in work on and around the continuum problem and entropy in general, in particular Gödel. So a lot of people do describe Gödel as kind of the last great Platonist, but it's not entirely clear that he would have called himself that or thought about it that way. So one of the sort of places where people find or think, reasons people think of Gödel as a Platonist is because of his belief in the importance of the continuum problem. In particular, Georg Cantor's work on the transfinite and infinite numbers. And this is a good passage, and I think we'll leave it here. Cantor's conjecture about the continuum is not disprovable from the axioms of set theory, provided that these axioms are consistent. It is to be noted, however, that even if one should succeed in proving its undemonstrability as well, this would, in contradistinction, for example, to the proof of the transcendency of pi, by no means settle the question definitively. Only someone who, like the intuitionist, denies that the concepts and axioms of classical set theory have any meaning, or any well-defined meaning, could be satisfied with such a solution. Not someone who believes them to describe some well-determined reality. So it's that idea that the concepts have a reality that generally people take as a Platonic ideal. But I think what we'll get to is the idea that there is always, in all sort of universal categories, this idea of a maximum entropy that draws you to that reality. So in a sense, it doesn't matter whether the circle is an abstract ideal or this sort of leap towards this thing that I would eventually make if I kept messing with this in the right way. that idea brings the reality of those concepts, the concepts of number, or the translation from the deviance of reality to the sort of fixation of number. It gives them a foundation in a reality that's both abstract and not. And that's what we want to get to. Because what we see is like the point of all this is that the relationship between all this messing that I'm doing, and the circularity of it is that if you sort of imagine the circle as it would become, you get this potential to say, well, this is a unit circle, and we can define it, instead of defining it as this round thing, we can define it as a line that's this long with a pi addition. So this line sort of with the space multiplied by pi, gives you this kind of this line that goes around. And so it's the circle, instead of being sort of specifically this line, it's the relationship between this unit and pi extension, so extended by pi up and down and around. And that gives you the sense of both the abstract and the physical in one place. And you'll notice that pi shows up all over the place because of this relationship. Like anytime you're translating between the continuum, some continuous form, and some discrete or digital representation, you'll have to use pi to get that transformation. And so when we think about Platonic ideals, I want it to be in that kind of uncertain abstract place where it's neither real nor imaginary, or it's both real and imaginary. And that's kind of where we want to get to. But it's going to take some work to get the entropy solved, or at least understood to the point where we can apply it generally. So that's enough for today. Next time, I think we'll talk about nominalism, which is kind of not Platonism, but also not realism. Or maybe we'll start with realism, which is not Platonism or nominalism. Okay, we'll do something next time. Ciao.